Hello. Before starting these series of videos, I thought it might be best just to do a little introductory video to talk about what I intend to do with this playthrough, what I've got installed, what sort of mods I'm using, and just to talk about generally where this is going to go. So, as you've probably noticed from the video title, first thing is, this is me using a modded Skyrim playthrough, and I'm using specifically as my main centerpiece the Requiem overhaul. Um, if you're not aware of Skyrim overhauls, I'll just give a brief overview. Requiem changes quite a few things about Skyrim. I would say it's probably the most extensive of the overhauls out there. There are quite a few other ones. There's some very creative perk overhauls that are out there, some more extensive combat, magic, and gameplay overhauls. There's mods like Frostfall, for example, or the Apocalypse spell package, Ultimate Combat. There's even other overhauls such as Skyrim or its successor, Percus Maximus. There's perk overhauls like Ordinator, all different types of overhauls for all different things. So why have I chosen to go with Requiem? Well, there's a few different reasons for that. As I said before, it is a very extensive overhaul. Almost every aspect of the game is touched in some way. Specifically, there is a de-leveled world. You do see this to an extent with other mods, but not quite to the extent that Requiem does. Um, Enemies and loot are entirely de-leveled. If you come across a group of bandits and they're all at level 10, they will always be at level 10. Doesn't matter if you're level 1 or you're level 50. Obviously this can make some areas of the game quite easy as you level up, but initially it does make the game a lot tougher. On the flip side to that, however, the loot is also de-leveled. If you can get past the extremely powerful enemies at low enough levels, you will get very good loot. Doesn't matter what level you are, unlike in vanilla Skyrim, where, for instance, if you got the Nightingale armor at level 20, it is not as good as a Nightingale armor at level 50. That just doesn't happen in Requiem, so that's one aspect of it I quite like. It's also revamped in terms of combat and magic. In Requiem, your skills are important, but they're not as important as your combat, as your perks in your combat and magic trees. If you're trying to cast destruction spells without any perks in destruction, they're not going to work very well. To an extent, it will still work, but they'll be very costly, they'll be very weak. You won't get very good results. Same with combat. If you're trying to use a two-handed weapon and you have no perks in two-handed weapons, it doesn't matter if it's a Daedric, Warhammer, Vampirism. Well, to an extent, it will matter. If you hit something that hard, it's probably going to die if it's weak enough. But by and large, you won't get the results you're after if you're using things that lay outside your expertise. So it promotes specialization and, to an extent, role-playing. And that is one of the things about Requiem. It is designed as a role-playing overhaul. You are meant to, instead of like in vanilla Skyrim where you can pretty much master everything given enough time, the idea behind this is you are meant to specialize, you are meant to pick a particular role, a particular type of character that you want to be, and to build towards that. In addition to that, Requiem also has certain atmospheric changes to the game. With the de-leveled enemies, um, and with enemies with new abilities and new powers, there's a very real sense of danger in Requiem. Dragons are terrifying. Dragons can take out an entire town and depopulate it with no problem. That's just how dangerous they are. They're not like in vanilla where you hit them with half a dozen arrows and they fall over. They are very dangerous and they are not something you want to take on at low level. Even Draugr are somewhat dangerous. They are definitely more of a mid-game enemy than an early-game enemy. Anyone who's played Requiem before and made the mistake of going to Bleak Falls Barrow at level 2 can tell you all about that. Draugr are not to be trifled with. Vampires, again, absolutely terrifying. Dragon priests, terrifying. High-level mages, all these things. So there is a very real sense of danger in Requiem. And while of course you can go and avoid these things to a certain extent, that's not always possible. Sometimes they will just come out of nowhere and surprise you. In addition to that, Requiem makes things very expensive. If you're not trained in the arts of persuasion, you are going to get ripped off. And the early game is just painful in that respect. You don't have a very high weight capacity. In fact, I'll show you my characters. See, my character has 100 weight capacity. Oh, I wasn't expecting Requiem to do that. But yes, Requiem has a very low weight capacity. You are a lot weaker at the lower level, so you can't carry much. You can't afford much. You are really scrounging by to survive, especially if you're using basic needs mods like I am. To an extent you can get around that through various methods, but if you've never played before it can be quite daunting. There's no fast travel in Requiem. You can enable it if you want to. I will be choosing not to. That also adds to the whole experience if you're especially if you're using something like Frostfall or Hypothermia. So you'll be travelling a lot on foot. It'll be wet, it'll be miserable, it'll be snowy. Things will come out of nowhere and attack you. Yeah, it makes the game feel a lot larger and again adds into that sense of danger. Because of all of that, there's very much a feeling that you go from being zero to hero. You do start off a little better than a peasant in Requiem. I mean, you do to an extent. You're better off than just some random merchant, but you're not much better. Bandits will kill you. Even large wolf packs can take you down quite easily. Saber cats will not have a problem killing you. It's things like that which yeah, and then as you get later into the game you get more powerful, you start getting better gear and higher levels than your enemies, then you start to really feel the difference. And that's when it starts to get interesting, because then you can start taking on those more scary enemies that I mentioned. So, as I said, this is a role-playing overhaul, so I suppose I should tell you a little bit about my character first. Well, as some of you requested, when I sort of floated this idea to some of you, you said out of all the options that I gave you, that you would like to see a Spellblade. So, I chose a Dunmer character because I thought that would go best with a Spellblade archetype. It was either that or Breton. And I do like Dunmer. Reminds me of Morrowind. So we have our character here, Vadeus Avalin, a Dunmer Spellblade. He'll be specialising in these particular skills. Destruction. So this will be what will carry us through to the late game. This will be what we use to kill dragons and vampires and all the rest. because I do intend to go as far as I can with this character through all the quest lines. We will be using alteration as well. This will be mostly for defensive purposes, um, specifically for magic resistance, spell armor, and for the mage armor spells. We will, however, be supplementing our defensiveness with light armor, wherever it is here, evasion. In Requiem, you do have spell cost penalties if you wear armor. Heavy armor has much heavier spell spellcasting costs than it would in light armor, although light armor still does have a penalty. It's not as big, but then again, light armor is not as defensive. So we'll be wearing that and using alteration to defend ourselves. We will also be specializing in conjuration. The idea behind this is we'll be using it to summon Atronax, and they will tank for us. We're not going to use necromancy. Our character, although he's not the most kind of pious character in the world, he does hold to some of the Dunmer traditions, so he doesn't like necromancy or undead very much. Undead are for guarding ancestral tombs, as far as he's concerned. Anything else, he's a bit creeped out by, he doesn't like it. So yes, we'll also be using one-handed. Our idea will be to use swords. One sword, not two swords. So yeah, going for swords here. The idea is we'll be using enchanted swords, and we'll be using them to apply whatever enchanted effect we have. And so we will also be specializing in enchanting. We do have mods installed that would allow us to get by without doing this, but I figure with his sort of background and everything, and his abilities and how we're going to build him, that enchantment would be a good way to go. It would allow us to supplement both the offensive capabilities of our character and his defensive options as well. So in terms of actual character traits, our character is a young noble of Great House Telvanni. If you've played Morrowind, you may be aware of that house. You may have even joined that house. They are the sort of mage house of Morrowind and of the Dark Elves. He's come to Skyrim because the Thalmor are, in essence, being dickbags. They're sneaking around Morrowind. They're trying to get at Telvanni magical secrets, trying to come to them as advisors, trying to buy up information on what the Telvanni know. And House Telvanni's not very happy about that. It jealously guards its secrets, and it does not like the Thalmor trying to get at them. So our character, being a young and ambitious Telvanni, as all Telvannis are, has come to Skyrim to try and see what the Thalmor are up to here, because information on what the Thalmor are doing and disrupting the Thalmor is something that House Telvanni is very interested in, and it could be a very quick way for someone to rise through the ranks and gain opportunities in the house. So that's what our character is doing. Quest-wise, we'll be looking at doing the College of Winterhold. We'll be looking at Dawnguard and joining the Dawnguard, because of course we're not a big fan of necromancy, even though there are a few vampires in House Telvanni. And we'll be probably siding with the Empire in the Civil War. We won't be joining the Companions, and we don't really have the skills to join the Thieves Guild or to join the Dark Brotherhood. Mod-wise, this is what we're going with. We have Immersive College of Winterhold. It makes the college a bit more of a viable base of operations, makes it look nicer, makes it a little bit more interesting to be around. We have Campfire. which of course will go into Frostfall. We have complete crafting overhaul and Cryptopeer's other mods to make weapons and armor a bit more consistent. We have dual wield parrying, so we can have a spell in one hand and a sword in the other and actually be able to block. We have dynamic things because it makes no sense if we're surrounded by trees and we're freezing to death that we can't cut them down for firewood, which is what happens when you use base Skyrim and Frostfall. And this also allows you to have safe containers and things, so it's quite handy. We also have immersive armors and immersive weapons. I have to say I'm not the biggest fan in the world of immersive weapons, but it does add a lot of needed variety to the weapons in Skyrim. I would prefer to use lore weapon expansion, but one of the problems with Requiem is if things aren't patched to work with it, it can very easily not work properly or throw off the balance or other things. And unfortunately, lore weapon expansion does not have a patch that I'm aware of. We're also using honed metal, which I do recommend to everyone who does use Requiem or does like to roleplay their characters, because this allows you to not have to worry about enchanting or smithing. If you're playing, for instance, a thief style character where you wouldn't really be doing those things, then this is really helpful because you give it to a blacksmith, you give it to an enchanter, you pay them a large amount of money and they make it for you, just like in previous games. And the costs, they work out very well with Requiem, in my opinion. They're quite realistic, so it works out quite well. We have I need, so we do need to eat, drink and sleep. That's just to be a bit of a money sink as well as realism. I've got minimal HUD. A lot of people I know prefer iHUD. The problem with iHUD is, although it is a good mod, you have to hide the HUD, and then if you need it again you have to bring it up again. So it's just as obtrusive as it always is, whereas a minimal HUD, it's a bit more unobtrusive on the screen. So like here, you can see the compass, but it's not very large, and you can't see any of the attribute bars. They're not there until you need them, of course. What else have we got? We have a real shelter, so we can actually shelter under things to escape from the rain and the snow. We have Skyrim Unlocked. This is a useful mod if you've never heard of it. It allows you to access otherwise inaccessible areas of the game because they're quest locked for whatever reason. So, for instance, if you, in vanilla Skyrim, if you want to get all 3 words of the Fire Shout, you have to join the companions and go to Dustman's Cairn. You don't have to do that if you have this installed. You can just go there on your own, get in there, get the, do the dungeon. If you want to get the Galdor Amulet in vanilla Skyrim, you have to join the Mages College. Again, with this mod, you don't have to. So I like that. Got trade and barter just to make vendors a bit more interesting, add a few more factors into prices. Everything is ridiculously expensive in Requiem anyway, as I've mentioned, at least until you start putting points into speech. But we have that there. And we have violence for our kill moves. We have a couple of other mods installed as well. We have Climates of Tamriel. We have interesting NPCs. We also have, for lighting, I did want to go with realistic lighting overhaul, but it doesn't cover everything. It's not a complete mod yet, so I went instead with relighting Skyrim and ELE light. It's not quite as dark as realistic lighting or ELFX is, but it's very performance friendly and it can still make things quite dark in the darker dungeons. So it's still fairly realistic. What else? I've got audio and sound overhaul, and a couple other minor mods and things. But that's basically what we're going with. And for the start, I've decided we're going to do the vanilla start. Yes, it's boring, but it's a good introduction to everything. Gets us started quite quickly. And the thing is, with the way the Stormcloaks are, I don't find it very realistic that they'd be welcoming even more Dunmer refugees into Windhelm. So I don't see that option being viable for our character. And starting off on Solstheim sounds like a terrible idea. So I think doing the vanilla start makes most sense. He wanted to get into Skyrim, he couldn't because of Windhelm's racist policies towards Dunmer, so he went south into Cyrodiil and then came through the Pale Pass, and that's where he got picked up by the Legion for the vanilla start. What else? I'll put the full mod list in the description so you can see what I've got. Just a little word of warning. Because I don't like frostbite spiders at all, I have modded them out of the game. Some people may take umbrage with that. They may say, well, you're making the game a lot easier by doing that. To an extent, I would agree. I just really don't like them. I don't know what it is. I don't mind spiders in any other game. I mean, I've played Dragon Age Inquisition, and that's got, a whole area, well, multiple areas full of spiders, including a giant demon spider boss. But I don't know what it is about frostbite spiders, but I don't like them. They make my hair stand up on the back of my neck. They creep me out, so I have removed them and replaced them with bears. These bears are fully perked out Requiem bears. They have all the same perks that normal bears do, and they have the hit points that they should have if they were spiders. So although they're not as tough because they don't obviously spit poison from range, they don't have the animations for that, or the ability to do that because I've modded it out myself. They do actually tend to bum rush you though, because I've made them more aggressive than normal bears. So they still serve the same function. They will zerg you, they will knock you down, and they will tear you to shreds. So just in case you see a bear where you're expecting a giant spider, that is why. I haven't touched any of the other enemies at all. Not using any other enemy improving or changing mod. I think Requiem does plenty of that on its own. However, if it does get too easy, because we are going to be using destruction, then in the later game I'll look at possibly installing Revenge of the Enemies and maybe Dragon Combat Overhaul as well. Those two I think may be a bit much for the early game. If we run into a Master Vampire at level, well, I mean, if we run into a Master Vampire at a low level, we're dead anyway. But if we're fighting a dragon at level 15, say, at the watchtower, and then it calls on 5 of its buddies to show up and help it, then we're all dead. There's just no two ways about it. We're all dead. Same with Revenge of the Enemies. The Draugr become a lot more difficult at low levels with Revenge of the Enemies installed. So we will be leaving that out for now. When Requiem 2.0 is finally released, I may, I suspect when that is released, previous characters will be incompatible with it. I will still continue this playthrough if it's going on at that point, but I will probably start a new character for Requiem 2.0. I'm thinking I might go with a Nightblade style character. Not a Dunmer Nightblade though, another race, since we've already got a Dunmer character here, and we'll do the more illegal side of Skyrim, the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood and all that fun stuff. So yes, that probably does it for an introduction. So I will see you in the opening sequences of the game.